The first fertilizer truck was turned around at 6:40 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. By 9 o'clock, 3 more were sitting stranded on the county road, and by noon, I had nearly 40 tons of approved organic soil amendments sitting uselessly outside a farm that had been operating much longer than the luxury neighborhood next door had even existed. The nervous security guard at the gate told my drivers they were carrying prohibited commercial material, a legally loaded phrase that came directly from the Homeowners Association president. My name is Daniel Mercer, a 51-year-old man who owned Green Hollow Farm, a massive organic vegetable operation just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. We diligently grew lettuce, kale, peppers, tomatoes, squash, herbs, and specialty greens for high-end restaurants, farmers markets, and 2 regional grocery distributors across a farm that covered just over 70 acres. Most people assumed the absolute biggest threat to a working farm like mine was the unpredictable weather. But that spring, the biggest threat was actually a homeowners association with a brand new security gate and a rogue president who arrogantly believed she could rewrite a legally recorded property easement simply by sending an email. The HOA was called Stonegate Reserve, and its newest luxury phase had been built directly along the southern edge of my property, featuring one main paved entrance for residents that completely crossed an older, highly established farm access road that had legally existed for decades. That critical access was not just some informal handshake agreement. It was fiercely recorded in the county deed, containing explicit language that allowed agricultural vehicles, heavy deliveries, harvest equipment, farm inputs, and all related traffic to freely cross a narrow strip of land that Stonegate's developer had later purchased around. The original developer fully knew it, the title company knew it, the county knew it, and until Karen Whitmore officially became HOA president, the shared arrangement worked absolutely perfectly. Then, Karen suddenly decided my compost trucks were damaging the pristine image of her community, loudly complaining that they were dirty, falsely claiming they were highly hazardous, heavily complaining about the natural odor, and arrogantly insisting that wealthy buyers should absolutely not have to watch working farm trucks near the entrance to their million-dollar homes. Acting entirely on her own arbitrary authority, she ordered Stonegate Security to immediately stop every single delivery truck carrying fertilizer, compost, mulch, or soil amendments from ever entering the property. What she absolutely did not know was that I had spent my entire working life professionally dealing with complex land use, soil conservation, agricultural access, and strict conservation planning, because I proudly served as a USDA NRCS state conservationist. That prestigious federal title certainly did not give me the legal right to unfairly punish an HOA, nor did it magically make my private farm dispute a federal government case, and the very first thing I meticulously did was deeply ensure it strictly stayed exactly that way. I highly disclosed the conflict internally, and completely recused myself from any government agency matter that could even remotely touch my private property. And then, I aggressively hired a private attorney, called the county, pulled the official deed, permanently saved the gate video, and methodically collected every single delivery manifest. Then, I simply sat back and waited patiently for Stonegate to foolishly put its illegal position directly in writing, which they absolutely did when Karen confidently sent an email herself stating, "Turn every fertilizer truck around. He will stop farming eventually." That one single, arrogant sentence quickly became the absolute most expensive thing she ever wrote in her entire life. Green Hollow had proudly been in my family for exactly 34 years, heavily starting when my father bought 22 acres and a borrowed tractor before I slowly expanded the massive operation, buying adjoining parcels, installing intricate drip irrigation, building heavy wash stations, and completely converting production towards strict, certified organic standards. By the time Stonegate Reserve arrogantly appeared next door, Green Hollow was absolutely not some cute hobby farm. We had full-time employees, massive cold storage units, strict delivery contracts, and highly sensitive seasonal planting schedules where every single week deeply mattered. If vital compost or approved soil amendments suddenly arrived late, the devastating delay did not just magically disappear when the truck finally showed up, because fragile planting windows violently shifted. Delicate transplants stayed in their trays way too long, massive fields lost their vital moisture timing, and expensive labor crews had to be completely rescheduled. A working farm can easily lose thousands of dollars without a single plant actually dying. Stonegate's original developer had heavily handled the shared access incredibly professionally, long before their construction even began. Their attorney specifically contacted my father's old attorney to legally confirm the recorded agricultural route. The massive development plans clearly showed the farm road. The construction crews were heavily ordered never to obstruct it, and the final recorded subdivision documents explicitly included a glaring note formally acknowledging the existing agricultural operations. The legal language was completely plain and undeniable. Permanent agricultural access shall remain open for farm vehicles, input deliveries, harvest operations, and necessary farm service traffic. The massive subdivision was legally built completely around that strict right, absolutely not over it, and for years, the wealthy residents barely even noticed us working. Most heavy farm traffic happened extremely early. Our careful drivers stayed incredibly slow. We diligently kept all mud entirely off their pristine pavement, and we constantly moved heavy equipment as carefully as possible. Then, Stonegate suddenly upgraded its lavish entry landscaping and purposefully installed a decorative secondary gate right near the critical point where my old farm road crossed the association-controlled land. That massive new gate was supposedly installed just to purely improve neighborhood security. It was absolutely not legally supposed to violently interfere with our established access. But Karen saw it completely differently. She had recently been elected president after heavily campaigning on enforcing stronger visual standards and aggressively protecting property values, starting with a petty complaint about my truck appearance, which quickly escalated into whining about the smell, then baseless complaints about road wear, and finally culminating in her aggressively using the legally fabricated phrase, industrial agricultural traffic. I highly tried to resolve the petty dispute completely informally, politely sending the property manager a certified copy of the easement, calmly explaining that the bulk deliveries were entirely normal farm operations, generously offering to coordinate the absolute largest trucks completely outside of school bus hours, and even freely agreeing to pressure wash the shared pavement myself if a messy delivery ever accidentally left any soil behind. Absolutely none of that was good enough for her, because Karen relentlessly wanted the trucks completely gone, arrogantly telling her management team that wealthy residents had absolutely not paid premium housing prices just to live beside a commercial agricultural loading route. That single, arrogant statement told me absolutely everything I needed to know, because she clearly did not see my farm as something heavily protected by legally recorded rights, but rather as something annoyingly temporary that she could easily bully out of existence. If you ever own farmland, a private lane, a utility corridor, or any property directly beside a newer luxury development, tightly keep the absolute oldest records you can find, because brand new asphalt absolutely does not erase an old easement. A shiny security gate absolutely does not erase a county deed, and a petty board vote absolutely does not miraculously turn somebody else's unshakable legal access right into a mere privilege. If you have ever dealt with a corrupt HOA that arrogantly behaved as though their new development automatically came first, heavily leave your opinion down in the comments and absolutely share this story with someone who owns rural land sitting directly beside a new subdivision. I genuinely did not want a massive public legal fight. I just simply wanted my heavy delivery trucks to peacefully get through the gate. But Karen desperately wanted to make my massive farm highly inconvenient enough that I would eventually be forced to completely change how it operated. And that was her single, absolutely fatal legal mistake. The very first formal HOA violation notice arrived aggressively in March, wildly claiming that my agricultural deliveries were somehow creating nuisance odors directly near Stonegate's southern entrance. I immediately responded straight through my ruthless attorney, Rachel Sloan, who calmly asked the board to legally identify the exact specific rule, miraculously giving them the authority to heavily regulate lawful farm deliveries straight over a recorded county easement. A devastating legal question they absolutely never answered directly. Instead of answering, the HOA arbitrarily imposed strictly illegal delivery windows, mandating absolutely no trucks before 9 a.m., absolutely no trucks after 4 p.m., absolutely no weekend deliveries whatsoever, and completely banning any heavy vehicles above a certain weight limit without receiving advance board approval. For a tiny suburban landscaping crew, those strict hours might have been highly manageable, but for a massive commercial working farm, they were entirely impossible, because bulk soil deliveries almost always arrived incredibly early. Heavy harvest equipment constantly moved, exactly when the unpredictable weather allowed, and some of my contracted drivers literally came from several hours away. Rachel fiercely objected in writing, forcing Karen to wildly escalate the situation by ruthlessly instructing her security team to require explicit pre-clearance for any vehicle carrying fertilizer products, a seemingly narrow rule that, in practice, meant nervous guards immediately began heavily stopping compost, mulch, lime, massive loads of potting mix, totally approved organic amendments, and even a perfectly harmless load of coconut coir. One frustrated driver was forced to wait 45 agonizing minutes while a confused guard desperately called the management office, while another massive truck was entirely turned around simply because the office could not instantly reach Karen on her phone. Then came the devastating Tuesday morning blockade. 4 massive trucks holding nearly 40 tons of critical agricultural material. 2 heavy trucks were carrying essential compost blends entirely meant for fields scheduled to be heavily planted that exact week. One carried highly expensive pelletized soil amendments, and the 4th held bulk organic planting mix for a massive greenhouse expansion. And the nervous security guard completely refused all 4 of them. I calmly drove down to the gate and absolutely did not argue with the guard, because I fully knew he was only doing exactly what his corrupt employer had legally told him to do. Instead, I politely asked him to clearly state the official refusal reason directly on my camera, capturing him stating that the HOA had strictly prohibited all fertilizer deliveries until further notice. I calmly asked whether he had ever seen the recorded easement. He had not. I asked whether the county had issued any formal safety order. They had not. And I clearly asked whether there was a hazardous spill, chemical leak, or any medical emergency. Absolutely not. Then I quietly left, letting Rachel fiercely send a devastating demand letter within exactly 2 hours, heavily attaching the fully recorded easement and aggressively demanding immediate, unobstructed farm access. Karen arrogantly responded that the HOA had a strict duty to protect its wealthy residents from highly hazardous materials and massive commercial traffic, which instantly gave us a completely second legal problem, because she had suddenly started publicly calling lawful farm inputs hazardous without absolutely any scientific or legal basis. We aggressively requested the official documentation heavily supporting that wild claim, and absolutely nothing came back. But because my trucks eventually had to return to the supplier, I was forced to heavily pay massive restocking and redelivery fees, while an entire planting crew completely lost half a working day, forcing 2 massive fields to slip dangerously behind schedule. Karen arrogantly considered that financial damage absolute proof that her illegal policy was completely working, even smugly writing to another board director that the massive disruptions would easily encourage me to just use a totally different entrance. The fundamental problem was that there was absolutely no practical different entrance for heavy agricultural deliveries, which was exactly why the recorded easement legally existed in the first place. Then, Rachel miraculously obtained a legally subpoenaed copy of Karen's longer, highly damning email chain, where one single, arrogant sentence glared right off the page. "Turn every fertilizer truck around. He will stop farming eventually." Directly below it, another nervous director had accurately replied, "We should legally confirm we actually have the authority to close the agricultural access before we do this." To which Karen ruthlessly answered, "We completely control the gate, and that gives us all the leverage." She was incredibly wrong, because controlling a physical gate is absolutely not the exact same thing as legally controlling the unbreakable property right behind it. Because of my highly sensitive USDA position, I was incredibly, ruthlessly careful right from the very beginning, strictly notifying agency counsel that a purely private property dispute had aggressively arisen right next to my farm, making it abundantly clear that I would absolutely not participate in any official government matter involving Stonegate Reserve or my own private property. Any necessary government contact would strictly go completely through ordinary, fully public channels that were openly available to any ordinary landowner. And then I simply went home and ruthlessly handled the case exactly like a farmer. Rachel meticulously built a devastating legal file, heavily gathering the certified copy of the easement, the original subdivision plat, the old developer correspondence, the stamped gate footage, the truck manifests, the massive invoices, the heavy redelivery charges, my strict employee time records, the sensitive crop schedules, and those highly arrogant emails straight from Stonegate. We aggressively hired a highly specialized private title attorney to strictly examine the access history completely independently, and his legal conclusion was absolutely simple. The right was 100% valid. It permanently ran with the land. The later subdivision development had absolutely not magically extinguished it, and the recorded access language expressly and undeniably included heavy farm inputs and all vital service traffic. The HOA could strictly regulate purely reasonable safety details in areas it completely owned, but it absolutely could not illegally use those petty details to violently destroy the access itself. Then we ruthlessly checked her wild legal claim about hazardous materials, easily proving that the massive loads Karen aggressively stopped were entirely ordinary agricultural products being safely transported in fully sealed or heavily covered commercial vehicles. Meaning there was absolutely no chemical spill, absolutely no county health order, absolutely no emergency finding, and absolutely no prohibited substance issue ever legally identified. Rachel aggressively sent Stonegate the completely harmless manifests and ruthlessly asked exactly once again for the strict legal basis of their illegal ban. The terrified board's outside attorney finally entered the legal conversation, and his tone was entirely different, desperately asking the HOA to temporarily suspend their illegal blockade while a full title review aggressively occurred. Karen fiercely refused, arrogantly arguing that restoring the farm access before the review finished would somehow fatally undermine the board's negotiating position, a highly useful, legally damning phrase that proved absolutely everything. She cared entirely about her illegal negotiating position. Absolutely not safety, absolutely not chemical contamination, absolutely not a medical emergency, but purely about her illegal leverage. Then we aggressively pulled Stonegate's original developer files straight from the county planning records, and that was exactly where the legal story violently changed for the worst. The original developer had absolutely not merely known about the agricultural road, but its highly paid engineers had literally designed the entire southern entrance directly around it, leaving a glaring construction note that strictly stated, existing farm access to remain unobstructed. A massive title memorandum went even further, explicitly declaring, subsequent development shall not interfere with agricultural vehicle access to Green Hollow Farm. The very gate location itself had even been extensively reviewed, exactly with my easement fully in mind, completely proving that the original gate design included a massively wider clear opening, installed specifically for my heavy farm trucks. At some unknown point during a later, highly arrogant HOA landscaping upgrade, completely decorative bollards had illegally narrowed that exact opening, exactly before their private security contractor began completely stopping my vital vehicles, proving the association had maliciously turned a physical gate entirely designed to preserve my easement into a highly illegal tool used specifically for defeating it. Rachel aggressively sent the highly damning developer documents straight to the panicked board, their terrified management company, and Stonegate's completely horrified insurer. Within exactly 24 hours, the massively liable insurer aggressively appointed outside counsel, and within exactly 48 hours, the terrified board frantically called an emergency meeting, but by then, our massive legal damage file was already dangerously growing. 2 heavily delayed fields had completely missed their strict preferred preparation window. 1 highly sensitive produce contract strictly had to be financially adjusted, and massive amounts of temporary labor had been fully rescheduled. Nothing completely catastrophic, and absolutely nothing wildly exaggerated, but highly measurable, legally binding business losses entirely created by a physical gate the HOA had been strictly warned never to legally close. Stonegate's panicked emergency meeting lasted 3 agonizing hours, and while I absolutely did not attend, Rachel certainly did, later happily telling me that the violent turning point was absolutely not my federal job title, but entirely the original title memorandum. The terrified board attorney heavily projected it right on a massive screen for everyone to read. Agricultural access shall remain open, followed entirely by the explicit developer plan boldly stating, existing farm access to remain unobstructed, and finally culminating entirely with Karen's highly illegal, highly arrogant email screaming, turn every fertilizer truck around. Those 3 massive legal documents ruthlessly told the entire, devastating story. Stonegate absolutely had a basic security concern that it was totally entitled to manage, but it had absolutely zero legal right to maliciously use that minor concern as a wildly illegal pretext to completely eliminate my recorded access. Outside counsel aggressively recommended heavily reopening the gate absolutely immediately, and the completely terrified board quickly voted 4-1 to entirely surrender, with only Karen arrogantly voting no. The very next morning, the first heavy replacement truck came rolling completely through at exactly 6:15 a.m., with security quickly waving it straight in as I calmly filmed the entire passage. Absolutely no loud confrontation, absolutely no petty shouting, and absolutely no arrogant celebration, as my driver simply delivered the massive compost pile and quietly left. That single victory absolutely should have peacefully ended the dispute right then and there, but instead, the terrified board now heavily had to deal with massive financial liability. Rachel aggressively submitted our highly documented legal losses, massive redelivery charges, heavy supplier penalties, extensive crew downtime, complete labor rescheduling, expensive additional transport costs, and severe crop impact, entirely tied to specific planting delays. Stonegate's horrified insurer wildly challenged some of the massive numbers, which we completely expected, forcing an expert agricultural accountant to highly review them until the final settlement figure emerged. Slightly lower than our massive initial demand, but still incredibly, legally significant. Then, an entirely completely second problem massively surfaced. The heavily panicked security contractor completely proved They had been strictly instructed to blindly enforce a massive list of highly prohibited materials that the HOA had wildly created entirely internally. Several absurd categories were incredibly vague enough that the completely untrained guards had absolutely no practical way to safely distinguish basic fertilizer, organic compost, simple mulch, a totally harmless soil amendment, or completely ordinary farm supplies. Even worse, one highly frustrated security supervisor had previously strictly warned management that their illegal policy was completely impossible to enforce consistently, and that glaring warning had been completely and entirely ignored too. The terrified insurer aggressively pushed for an immediate legal settlement, forcing Stonegate to fully agree to entirely compensate the heavily documented portion of our massive business losses and heavy delivery expenses, while also legally agreeing to instantly restore the gate opening back to the exact physical dimensions completely shown in the original developer plan. The wildly illegal decorative bollards were completely ripped out, a totally separate farm access lane was highly marked, and security instantly received heavily written instructions explicitly stating that any agricultural traffic legally using the easement could absolutely not be denied access merely because it safely carried heavy farm inputs. Reasonable emergency and basic safety rules obviously still applied, which actually deeply mattered to me, because I was absolutely not wildly asking for a completely private highway with zero rules. I was merely fiercely asking for the exact legal right that had completely already existed. Then, the completely horrified board suddenly learned that Karen had completely never legally disclosed that she was actively leading a massive real estate marketing committee, aggressively promoting the subdivision's highly expensive southern lots. Subpoenaed emails devastatingly showed she fully believed my highly visible farm traffic drastically reduced the exact luxury image she desperately wanted wealthy buyers to blindly see, making the entire illegal fertilizer ban suddenly look infinitely less like genuine safety enforcement, and vastly more like a purely malicious, highly illegal attempt to ruthlessly make my entire farm completely disappear from the landscape. The county obviously did not aggressively arrive with blaring police sirens, because that is absolutely not how most civil property disputes ever end. Instead, a county land records official calmly and legally confirmed the heavily recorded easement. Planning staff effortlessly verified the vital access completely appeared right on the massive subdivision documents, and the county agriculture office perfectly confirmed Green Hollow was a highly active, fully protected farm operation. Absolutely none of those massive county offices legally punished Stonegate directly. They just simply completely removed all the highly manipulated legal uncertainty that Karen had been maliciously using as a weapon. The absolute legal right existed. The massive subdivision had absolutely been heavily planned exactly around it, and the physical gate absolutely could not ever be legally operated in a way that maliciously made the entire recorded easement entirely meaningless, which was legally more than enough. At the extremely tense next HOA meeting, furious residents completely packed the clubhouse as Karen pathetically tried to blindly defend her illegal policy as a completely fake effort to heavily protect Stonegate from bad odor and dangerous heavy trucks, right up until board director Thomas Hale completely displayed the massive title memo on a giant screen, allowing the horrified residents to entirely read the glaring legal reality for themselves. One furious homeowner loudly asked exactly why the corrupt board had heavily paid expensive lawyers to violently debate a right that was perfectly already described directly in the developer file, while another aggressively asked why vital farm trucks had illegally been turned away entirely after their own council had heavily recommended reopening the gate. A third completely irate resident loudly asked whether the HOA actually had any real evidence that any of my completely stopped loads were actually highly dangerous, to which the terrifying answer was a humiliating no, before Thomas finally displayed Karen's incredibly illegal email, specifically plotting about making me completely stop farming, instantly causing the entire energy in the room to violently change. The furious residents, who had previously lightly complained about minor truck noise, completely suddenly understood that this entire massive legal battle had absolutely never been entirely about just noise. Her real, highly illegal goal was complete agricultural elimination. The completely humbled board forcefully adopted a brand new, strictly legal access policy that exact same night, mandating that all recorded easements completely had to be strictly reviewed entirely before any new security restrictions were ever imposed, strictly mandating that absolutely no corrupt board officer could wildly create a prohibited material category without massive legal review and a heavily factual safety basis, and fully promising that my legal farm access would entirely remain completely open, strictly within the explicit terms of the county deed. Heavy traffic scheduling could absolutely be highly coordinated, entirely voluntarily, but it legally could absolutely not ever be used as a weapon to completely deny access. The completely terrified security contractor instantly rewrote its entire gate procedures. The massively liable insurer fiercely required completely better legal documentation, and the completely terrified management company instantly added a strictly mandatory title review to absolutely all future infrastructure projects. Then, they completely came for Karen. A furious board motion instantly removed absolutely all of her petty authority, completely over security and all access matters, before a massive community recall petition aggressively gathered angry signatures completely over the next week, heavily forcing her to resign in absolute total disgrace right before the humiliating vote could legally happen. Thomas gracefully became the new interim president, and his very first polite email to me was exactly only 4 simple sentences. He legally acknowledged the recorded easement. He fully apologized for the massive business disruption. He respectfully attached the brand new gate procedure, and then he politely asked exactly whether I would kindly meet directly with management, entirely to calmly create a completely practical, mutually agreed schedule for the absolute largest seasonal bulk deliveries. I completely agreed. Absolutely not because they finally had any shred of legal power over my trucks, but completely because peaceful coordination exactly between good neighbors entirely makes sense when absolutely nobody is arrogantly pretending that basic coordination illegally means total control. By summer, the massive gate fully looked almost completely ordinary again. The completely illegal decorative bollards were heavily gone. The clear physical opening was vastly wider, and a very small, entirely tasteful sign perfectly identified the legal agricultural access. The new security guards had a completely simple, legally bulletproof instruction sheet mandating that all heavy farm vehicles entirely using the legally recorded route were completely allowed entirely through, while my large bulk deliveries kindly called heavily ahead exactly when completely practical. If any dirt or messy mud was accidentally entirely tracked exactly onto the shared common pavement, I highly cleaned it completely myself, and if Stonegate peacefully scheduled a completely major community event, friendly management kindly told me entirely in advance, meaning we finally just simply acted entirely like completely normal neighbors. The massive legal settlement completely reimbursed entirely enough of my highly documented business losses to entirely make my massive farm fully whole directly on the massive disruption, while my slightly delayed crop fields miraculously recovered vastly better exactly than I entirely expected. One minor harvest came in entirely a little completely late, while completely another amazingly came in almost entirely exactly right on schedule, strictly proving that my massive farm absolutely did not completely disappear, and neither entirely did Stonegate. The wealthy residents absolutely still had entirely their pristine landscaped entrance. We absolutely still entirely had our massive roaring tractors, and some mornings, a massively expensive luxury SUV entirely waited just 30 minor seconds entirely while my massive compost truck safely turned exactly through the gate, and the entire world completely survived. My massive federal job completely never actually decided the entire case, and that crucial part heavily mattered entirely to me. I absolutely did not wildly call any USDA employees to heavily ask them to entirely lean exactly on the corrupt HOA. I completely did not wildly use my massive government title entirely in a single private legal demand letter, and I entirely did not wildly threaten absolutely anybody directly with massive federal power. I fully recused myself and calmly let exactly the ordinary, incredibly boring property records entirely do all the massive legal work. Because the county deed was exactly enough. The official plat was totally enough. The massive developer memo was heavily enough. And those wildly illegal emails were completely vastly more than entirely enough. If you ever own land completely with an old driveway, a massive farm road, an access corridor, a vital drainage easement, or a major utility route, aggressively find the legally recorded document exactly before a massive legal dispute violently starts. Heavily save your massive maps, strict title records, massive invoices, clear photographs, time-stamped videos, and exactly every single written legal warning, because exactly the strongest legal evidence in completely any courtroom is entirely usually exactly the incredibly boring evidence, entirely created completely, before anybody ever actually knew there would entirely be a massive fight. If you strongly think Stonegate massively crossed the entire legal line strictly when it entirely used a simple security gate exactly to heavily pressure a massive working farm, strongly tell me your thoughts entirely down in the comments. Would you have completely settled exactly once access was fully restored, or completely taken the wildly corrupt HOA absolutely all the entire way directly to civil court? Aggressively share this massive story completely with exactly someone entirely who actually owns agricultural land, exactly near a massive new development. Heavily save the entire video directly if you completely enjoy massive property rights cases, exactly where incredibly boring paperwork entirely brutally beats massive neighborhood intimidation, and fully subscribe for exactly more insane HOA stories entirely, where the incredibly smartest legal response absolutely is exactly not wild revenge, but completely purely entirely knowing exactly what the completely arrogant other side absolutely exactly has zero legal right to violently take completely away. I still remember the exact morning those 4 massive trucks helplessly sat on the county road, 4 confused drivers waiting, exactly 40 tons of critical agricultural material going absolutely nowhere, a completely embarrassed security guard forced to enforce an illegal order he did not write, and a massively arrogant HOA president entirely convinced that controlling a physical gate miraculously meant controlling the working farm behind it. That was her fatal legal illusion, because while Stonegate legally owned the physical gate, it absolutely did not own the recorded county easement. Karen arrogantly controlled the board for a short while, but she absolutely did not control my legally binding deed. So while she could loudly call my organic compost ugly, and she could endlessly call my heavy farm trucks highly inconvenient, and she could even deeply convince herself that enough massive financial delays would miraculously make Green Hollow Farm completely disappear from the landscape, she absolutely could not ever vote away a legally recorded property right. The original developer had known that strictly before the very first Stonegate luxury house was ever even built. The massive engineering team completely knew it. The highly paid title company absolutely knew it. And my own father heavily knew it decades ago. The absolute only person who seemed completely surprised by reality was the exact same arrogant person who completely never bothered to actually read the legal documents before violently closing the gate, arrogantly thinking that illegally blocking my fertilizer would magically stop my massive farm, when instead, it entirely, ruthlessly exposed the single legally unbreakable property right their entire multi-million-dollar subdivision had been permanently built around.